All right. Are folks seeing a screen that says Foundation Directory Online at the top? Yes, and are you all also able to connect yourselves? I'm hoping. Okay, I'm not hearing any. Oh. Yes, awesome. Thanks, Natalie. Okay, so this is kind of a busy page, and you're probably very tempted, as I would be, to go ahead with this Google-like box in the middle of the page and start throwing in some search terms. But the power of something like Foundation Directory Online, which I will remind everyone, it's a subscription database. We have access for free all day today. So after we meet today, please feel free to search and save things to your heart's content. And then I'm going to let you know before I finish up other places to search for grants, but also where you might be able to access tools like this in your area. Okay. So there are three kind of primary fields that I typically fill out in something like Foundation Directory Online. So what I'm going to do, if you can see me hovering here over advanced search, I'm going to click on that. And two of the areas are right here at the top. One is subject area, and one is geographic focus. Foundations are a type of funder that really care about place. They have a geographic focus to their giving. So for instance, I'm in Maine. I know some of you are in Alaska and Washington and Colorado and Virginia and Mexico. So what I would do here is actually search for my state and then go ahead and enter it. And I'm not sure actually that this is going to be as good for our international folks, but let's try and see. So please do see if we can find something that works. And then subject area, this is kind of a set of terms that this database kind of says, hey, here are what these different foundations in our database say they're about. And so you'll see actually right at the top, there's an option that might fit with a lot of what you all are doing. We see fishing and aquaculture. You can search for things like sustainability, natural resources. I know many of us are in rural areas. Maybe we're interested in how your work will benefit your communities. There's a term in here called rural development. There's economic development. So you can play around, and we'll give you time in a minute to play around in here, but you can also do it as we go. And basically what we're saying is, hey, Foundation Directory Online database that we're searching, please give us a list of foundations that say they care about fishing and aquaculture, funding projects in that area, and in Maine specifically. You can add as many subject areas as you like. I have one here, but you could add 10 if you want. The more options you give it, the more foundations will probably be in your results. So it depends on what works best for you. If you like to start small and kind of see first, like what's here on fishing and aquaculture, and then build out from there, like, well, let's think more broadly. If I'm not finding much, like maybe I want to look at sustainability. You can always kind of come back and tinker. This is like any kind of searching you do anywhere, it's iterative. And then the last field that I would fill out on a form like this for Foundation Directory Online is under this link that says additional filters. Okay, so I'm here in this advanced search. I'm going to go to additional filters, and there's this field called support strategy. Support strategy refers to the type of funding you're looking for. So are you looking for research support? Are you looking to develop or build a program? Are you looking for seed funding? That sort of thing. And so you can kind of scroll through, you can click on these arrows, drop down, it's kind of a drop down menu of more specific terms that kind of define these different concepts. So for instance, under program support, there's pilot programs, program creation and expansion. So I might just click on the overall the general concept, or you could click specifically on the ones that you think are the best fit. The broader you go, the more results you'll get. The narrower you go, the fewer results you'll get, but ostensibly the more tailored and relevant they'll be. So again, that's where we start to play around. So this is what we're doing in Foundation Directory Online. This is kind of the basics. Is we come in here, we're going to set some criteria like what is the subject area, what's the area in which we're trying to get funding, or the area that you specialize in, what kind of geographic descriptor best, because I know some of you are working in a couple of different places, but what best describes where you are, where you will carry out the work, and then what kind of funding are you looking for. And I will say that Foundation Directory Online will give us a bunch of foundations, some of which will give for commercial purposes, but most will give for either nonprofit purposes or community impacts. And so as you look through some of your results in a moment, or maybe you've already hit search, you'll want to think about how you can speak to the work that you're doing and what kind of social impacts, community impacts they'll have that meet the missions of the foundations that show up in your results. Because a lot of what you're looking for when you decide to apply for a grant is this a good fit? Is my work a good fit? And are they a good fit? Like, do we seem to be a good match? Because these funders want to be able to say, hey, look what we did with our money. We made a difference in these ways. And so when you write your proposal, you're going to want to demonstrate to them, make it easy for them to see why you are going to help them look good, and they're going to help you accomplish something important. So that's what I would do, is fill out those fields and hit search, and we'll get some results that tell us a few things. One, this box on the left that says 110 grant makers, that means that there are 110 grant makers, 110 foundations that are actively providing grants based on the criteria that we entered. The other box that I just want to point your attention to is this grants file. This box is a historical file. It's not grant makers that are actively providing grants based on our criteria, but it's grants that have been given in the past by foundations represented in this database based on our criteria. So you can use this database in a couple of strategic ways. You can look to see who's actively giving based on our criteria. And then if you find some things, great. But if you're not quite finding something that's a good match, you can also look at grants that have already been given and see which foundations gave those grants, especially if you find something there that's like, oh, I do what that group does, and they got funding for it from this particular foundation. And then you can see if that foundation might be interested in funding your work because they have demonstrated an interest in the past in funding other work like yours. So different strategic approaches. One thing I would suggest we do here is first take a look at grant makers, and you'll see it gives you kind of the first 5, and then you can view all. And it's really up to you how you want to get started. You can see there are some, like Maine Community Foundation, that are clearly very local, and there are some that are federal funders, like the Fish and Wildlife Service. So depending on how much you're looking for and where you've gotten grants before, and if you're looking for different types of funders, that can kind of drive where you get started, especially if you have 110, which is a sizable amount. Not too much, but pretty good. One other thing I would say you can do is click on this box that says exclude grant makers not accepting applications. There are grant makers in Foundation Directory Online who will show up in our search because they are actively funding folks, but they already know who they want to fund. Some foundations are set up that way. They are set up to fund particular organizations, or they may not be taking applications like during COVID. Many foundations stopped taking applications while they had to figure out their financial situation, things like that. So I would say we could exclude those for now. That doesn't mean you would never approach these funders if they're not currently accepting unsolicited applications. Danielle might be able to speak to that later, but there are definitely situations where if you think you're a good match with a grant maker that's not currently accepting applications, you just reach out and see if you can kind of get them on the phone or get them to talk with you kind of about what you're doing, what you're about, and if it would be a good fit for them. So it doesn't mean that you can never apply to them, but for now, I would say, let's look at the people who are saying, yes, we want to fund the work you're doing. And from here, you would just start opening up some of these. It's basically clicking in and clicking out and kind of seeing what resonates with you and what looks like a good fit. So for instance, if I click on the Maine Community Foundation, what we're looking at is each result here is a description of the foundation, what their priorities are, what they care about. It's a profile. And the neat thing is, right at the top, they tell you in 3 different ways what their priorities are. So they tell you what's being funded and more generally, and where that money's going. And they tell you how big the grants are. And this can be useful too if you have a sense of how much you're looking for. That can be something you bring to your results list. If you've got a bunch of results, you're probably going to want to start culling them and just focusing in on the ones that seem to be the best fit. If you're looking for $1 million grant and a foundation mostly gives grants in amounts of 5,000 or less, maybe this isn't the best one for you. But if you're looking for, $25,000 to $50,000 and you see, oh, well, they've given about almost 2,000 grants in that range. I want to go this way. Almost 800 grants in that range. Then we can say, oh, let's keep going. And what we're looking at here in this profile is on the left is a vertical table of contents. So that you can get a sense of, is this a good fit? You'll see their funding interests. Sometimes you'll see specific programs they're looking to fund, and you can see if you are doing that work. That's a great way to get a sense of their priorities. But the first thing I would do out of the gate is go right here where it says giving limitations. That will tell you immediately if you're eligible to apply or not, and if you want to stick with this or move on. So I'm going to click here. And what you'll see is right under the application material, it says limitations. Giving limited to Maine, no support for religious organizations or religious purposes, no grants to individuals. You'll see this a lot with foundations, other funders too, but especially foundations. They oftentimes want to fund organizations, groups, and that is that doesn't mean that if any of you are looking specifically for yourselves as individuals doing various kinds of work in the umbrella of the local catch network that that you wouldn't be able to apply for something like this. It would just mean you would need to partner. So are there partners on this call? Are there partners in this group? Are there organizations or nonprofits or other folks you could work with to accomplish this goal that you want to accomplish? Government, local government, depends on what you're working on. And you can see here, this says no grants for equipment, annual campaigns, capital campaigns. So something to just keep in mind depending on the kind of funding you're looking for. If you're looking to create a program or expand a program and you can apply on, as an organization, it looks like we could move forward with this. So this is just an example of what you might see and how you can start to kind of disentangle these profiles and say, oh, I actually could see myself here. Like this actually looks like a good fit. There's a community building program, for instance, from the Maine Community Foundation, where they basically want to support projects that use existing community resources, strengthen community life, and focus on sustainability. So I could see this being maybe a really good fit for folks working in Maine on this call, as an example. So this is one approach to finding funding. This is a very powerful database. You can set the power is in setting these different criteria that give you, hopefully, results that are reasonably relevant to what you're looking to do. Yeah, that's what I wanted to kind of touch on first. I'm going to just check in with you all and see if there are any questions. And then what we'll do is spend about 5 more minutes exploring on your own, and then we'll come back and kind of chat and see how folks did, and if you found anything in Foundation Directory Online. Do folks have questions or comments or thoughts at this point? I'm gonna stop sharing just to make sure I can see. Okay. Okay, well then we'll go ahead and just in case folks came late and don't have this link, I'm gonna put it back in chat again. So we'll spend the next 5 minutes. If folks came in and didn't have that link, you can go to the link I just posted in chat, enter that username and password, and spend a little time seeing if you can find some grants.
Jen, it looks like we have a question from Clay. He said, what's the cost to subscribe for the Foundation Directory?
Yes, thank you. And from Ben too.
Ben too.
Yeah, so I was actually about to chat, so this is great. That's a great question. So for an organization, it depends on how many people you have. And so that would be something where you would contact FDO, Foundation Directory Online themselves. I'm going to find that information for you right now, and I will let you know. Sure.
And Jen, I don't know if you can speak to how people could potentially access this database without a personal registration as well.
Yes, I will speak to that when we come back, if that sounds good, because I have a few suggestions for folks.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Okay, so this is what I thought. It's very expensive. As you can see, it's very powerful, but it's also very expensive. So for an individual user, like if you subscribed individually, it's $1,500 a year. However, I'm going to share with you all in a few minutes some possible approaches to getting access to something like this without having to subscribe. But you all also, as the network, could reach out and see for a larger group how much it might cost, because they tend to kind of go down in cost the more people that participate. So that's another option, is to explore something like that. I hope that helps.
We have another question. And Jen, I don't know if you or Danielle want to take this on, maybe both of you could, but are there any recommendations on how to approach partnerships with entities in your area you don't have a relationship with?
How to start partnerships and collaborations? Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that in my presentation. So if I don't hit it well enough for you, ask me again. Is that fair?
Yeah, we can definitely come back to this question.
That's such a good question. So I just, in the interest of time, could we all come back? Hopefully you all have had some time to play around in Foundation Directory Online. And like I said earlier, you have the rest of the day. Those of you who are affiliated with University of Maine, you have perpetual access, but I think most folks here today are not affiliated with UMaine. So you'll have the rest of the day, and you can continue to find things and save them. And actually, I realized that I did not mention. Let me go back up here. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and open this. That you can, in your results, I don't know if you all found that already, but you can save, you can download or email things to yourself. So if you find a foundation or foundations that look like a good fit today, you can go ahead and email yourself that that record, like those profiles that we looked at, and you'll be able to look at that at a later time. Or you can download the information into an Excel spreadsheet, and then you'll have it, especially if you find multiple that you'd like to keep. That's a great way to go. So how did things go with your searching? Did you have any successes? Were there things that you wished you knew going in? Were there certain things that worked better for you? Great information and pretty intuitive. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Natalie. I'm glad you found it that way. I'm going to show you real quick. I mentioned there are tools for saving things if you find something good today. So you can see you can download a PDF of the profile, and that'll save that, you know, pretty page with the formatting and everything, or you can email it to yourself. So keep that in mind in each foundation. You can do that. Or if you have a list in your results list, you can select them all or select ones that you're interested in and then download an Excel spreadsheet. And at the top of most foundation profiles, if you haven't seen this yet, there's an actual link that's a direct link to that foundation or to their grant programs, so that if you find one that's a good match, you can go ahead and open up that link and bookmark it, because the FDO, Foundation Directory Online, is a great resource, but the definitive information comes from the source, right? So if you find something good, I would go directly to their website and figure out what exactly are the grant programs they're offering, what are their deadlines, what are the eligibility criteria, just to make sure you've got everything set up the way you need and you get the best information you can.
Jen, I got a direct message. This person said they searched NYC and everything came up as zeros across the board, subject area, fishing, aquaculture, and New York City as the geographic area.
Okay. That is frustrating. Okay, let's clear. If you don't mind, we'll just try something here. So you did fishing here. I got one grant maker, and it's the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. And the reason I may have gotten one and this person got zeros, because if they added anything out, like if you did add a support strategy and that didn't come up for this foundation, that may be why. But this does bring up a point that if you're getting nothing, that probably means that the search you did is specific in a way that it's not connecting with the foundation directory's, kind of keywords and their taxonomy. So that's where maybe this person who put New York City might want to put New York State, because maybe there are foundations that give in the state. They don't say they specifically give to New York City, but they still may very well give to New York City, but their profile says New York State. So we can just try that. Okay. And so I got 38 this time. So that might be one approach for this person to do, is pull out a little bit, broaden out a little bit, and do New York State. And there may be a little more noise in there because there may be some foundations that give to specific areas that aren't New York City, but there'll probably be more options as well for New York City that didn't come up before when we were specific in our search. That's a tough one when we drill down to like a county or a city. Sometimes that makes it so narrow that we don't get as many things. So I hope that helps. Other questions or experiences that people want to share? Okay, I wanted to share a few things with you. I'm going to give you another link in chat. If you don't mind opening that link, just as a heads up, this is a guide to funding that I have put together as a librarian at the University of Maine that supports the work that's happening on this campus. So the databases you'll see here, Foundation Directory Online and Pivot, are only accessible to those folks. But the reason I put it in there is to let you know there are many different databases like Foundation Directory Online that are subscription databases that may have some interesting things in them. And you can find them different places. So if you contact your local library or your university library, if you're anywhere near a university, it's highly likely that a university library or a university near you, it might be the research office, will have access to something like Foundation Directory Online, but it might be Pivot, which is a higher education focused database of grant opportunities. And it's you search it and work with it very similarly to what we just did with Foundation Directory Online. So I mentioned that to just plant some seeds that in your areas, wherever you live, some of you may or may not have access to libraries like this or universities, but I would reach out and ask, because if nothing else, they might be able to point you to area resources that could support the work that you do. I know, for instance, in Maine, we have a philanthropy center in Portland, Maine, and anyone can walk in and access Foundation Directory Online and talk with folks about grants and funding opportunities and get help in that way. So that's something as well. And Stephanie has said TerraVivaGrants.org also has fisheries grants sometimes, and it's a directory that costs $12 a year, which is a lot different than Foundation Directory Online. And so depending on what you're looking for and how powerful you need the database, you can try these different options. And I want to also share, so I'm going to share my screen again, that the Foundation Center is the organization that provides a subscription to Foundation Directory Online. And they have, there are philanthropy centers throughout the country that have access, like the one I mentioned in Maine, free access to Foundation Directory Online. And so I'm going to put this link in chat, but basically you can come here and enter your zip code, and then I'll enter mine. And then it will tell you where in the general vicinity there is a place where you can get help and use something like Foundation Directory Online. And so there's the Maine Philanthropy Center. There's some others in Maine, and then it has then broadened out to Massachusetts. So as an example, that's another option. If you can get into, if you are in proximity to a library or a philanthropy center that can do this kind of thing with you and can provide access. There you go. Yes, Jordan, there we are, sorry. There's that one. And then what else? There are other types of tools that are cheaper or free, like you probably saw this is candid.org. Candid is the organization that provides access to Foundation Directory Online. But the free stuff is very limited. However, it might still be of use. So Candid has a find funding option where you can't search by topic, like you wouldn't be able to search for fishing and aquaculture and sustainability, but you'd be able to see what grants they have in Alaska, for instance. And so then it would take some filtering through, kind of find if there's anything relevant to you. And maybe that's kind of what Stephanie was referring to as well. Terra Viva grants might have like lists that you can kind of cull through and see what's there, and maybe not as much of the searching capacity. And you may not need the searching capacity. It really depends on you and what you're looking for and who you're connected to, because maybe you have connections with people who can help you find grants. But I will say that I found two options in Pivot. I wasn't able to get access to Pivot today for everyone, so I figured it doesn't make sense to search it, but it's very similar to Foundation Directory Online, and it's in that link that I shared. But I did just want to pop them in chat because they looked like they might be of interest to many of you. And just as another example of things you might find doing some searches. So there's that one is the, share my screen again so you can see. One is the Fisheries Innovation Fund from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation that supports effective participation of fishermen and fishing communities in the implementation of sustainable fisheries. So that looked very relevant. And then there's also the CPACT grant that has that provides funding also kind of in the areas that seem to be relevant to this group. And there are others that would come up in a search like that. And I would say as well, I'll make sure you have my contact information, because if you want to reach out and chat more about any of this grant seeking itself, finding grants, and if you want help finding locations where you could get access to things like Pivot or Foundation Directory Online, I'd be happy to help kind of track that down for you. And I just wonder if there's anything else. Oh yeah, another plug for contacting your local or university library is that there are things you might never have thought of that might be helpful to ask about. Because for instance, at our library, we have something called the Directory of Maine Grant Makers. And so that's something I can point people to as another option. You know, you can look through this. It's a serial publication. It comes out every few years, and it's lists of hundreds of foundations in the state who give in various areas. And so even if you don't have access to a database, you can come to the library and look at this resource and find things that are relevant. And so, somebody might not know that if they didn't reach out. So I hope those are some helpful strategies. Those are just some ideas to think about when you're looking at how can I find grants? How can I make this a meaningful process? And how can I not beat my head against a wall, because it can be a very frustrating process. That's my goal too, is that some of this will provide some ease. But I'd be happy to take any other questions, or if folks want to share other ideas. Stephanie shared an idea in there. If others want to kind of just spend a couple minutes sharing ideas, that would work too.
It looks like we have a question from Clay. He was asking if there is no RFP beside the grant maker, does that mean the grants tend to not be broadcasted publicly? In other words, invitations are sent through the grapevine.
Oh, Clay, could you clarify, are you looking in Foundation Directory Online, or did you link out to a Foundation page and did not see an RFP there?
Yeah, this was actually through the Foundation Online.
Okay, so in the Foundation Directory Online, this is a very good question. It's not actually presenting grants themselves. It's presenting descriptions of foundations so that you can see if the foundation's mission and what they're trying to do aligns with what you're trying to do. So you probably won't see RFPs there. So thank you for pointing that out. So you'll then want to go to the top of that entry and see if there's a link to the actual foundation and look there for their RFPs. I hope that clarifies. Other thoughts or questions or suggestions? I'm gonna put my, sure thing. I'm gonna put my email in chat so you all will have it. And it's also on that grant resource page that I shared with you as well. Oh, if I could just share one more thing I forgot to mention. So Danielle's about to do some amazing stuff with you to share strategies for you to have a winning grant, write a winning grant. And to complement what she's going to share with you, just as a heads up on that link that I put in chat earlier to this research grants page, there are some online, while this I mentioned is geared toward the Maine community, so some of the resources here are like in our library, but everything here under online guides to proposal writing, freely available online. And there are free samples, examples of successful documents that people have shared from their winning grants. So proposal narratives, cover letters, letters of inquiry, budgets. So just as a heads up that stuff is available for you, and you don't have to remember all that. I'm just planting some seeds. So if later you want to pop me an email and be like, I'm at this stage and I thought you mentioned something about whatever, or I don't remember anything you said, could you talk to me again about what's available? Be happy to do that. So just as a heads up, there are some resources available to help guide you and inspire you as you get into the grant writing process or refresh the skills you already have.
Really quickly, Jen, I think that one of the links, the NFWF link, there's an error message. If you have time later in the webinar to drop in an updated link, that would be great.
Does that one work? No. Okay. I will absolutely fix that. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, there we go. I think that one should work.
Awesome. Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. Thank you for letting me know.
All right. Do we have any more questions for Jen? Great. Jen, thank you so much. This is such a wealth of information, and I'm excited that people have access to look through some of the databases today and save them. And thank you for offering, people to contact you if they have specific questions about searching for grant funding.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, if you are all wrapped up, we will pass it over to Danielle.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us to be a part of this conversation. And like Jen mentioned, it doesn't have to end here. So feel free to keep the lines of communication open. After this brief talk today, there's a lot of information that could be shared. I'm going to cover as much as I can in an overview fashion. But like Jen showed you, we have resources available that we can share not only through the library, but through the office that I work with. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the most important part of my job, is to help educate people and set them up for success when they're trying to go after grant funding. So let me pick the right screen to share. All right. So I work at the University of Maine in the Office of Research Development. The Office of Research has several different components to it at our university, and every university is set up differently. So I would recommend for those of you in other states that one of the things you can definitely do is to reach out to your local universities as a potential partner and a resource to find information. When I put this together today, for today, I picked Alaska as my target state. And just to go through the process of how I would look for funding I have a lot of that knowledge, obviously, for the state of Maine, because that's where I work, but I do the same process no matter where I lived. So our main job is to sort of help on the proposal development side of it. We don't do any of the administrative pieces. So share some tips and strategies with you today. Please don't be shy to ask questions. And if you feel so brave to do so, unmute yourself and ask it live. I would much rather be a give and take conversation than just having me talk at you the whole time. So I'll open that up as a possibility. All right. So the grant life cycle is pretty big. And one of the things I always want to remind people is to help set yourself up for success is to give yourself time and to really plan, because it's not something, especially for a really large grant, setting up those relationships and getting all the bits and pieces of a proposal together is a significant chunk of time. And if you look at this chart, and there's lots of different versions of this chart, but the writing of the proposal is only a small piece of the whole cycle. There's a lot of things before the writing, and there's a lot that happens after you get the money. So keep that in mind. There are suggestions on how long certain things can take, and this is one version that I like to use with researchers that I have conversations with, just to give them an idea of how long it could take. It doesn't mean it has to take this long. There are some people that thrive at writing on the fly and under a tight time constraint. I'm not one of those people. I'm one of those people that likes to have plenty of time to plan, to do it, to read it, to fix it, to read it again, and just sort of go at it systematically. But this, again, just sort of outlines for you as either a researcher or as a program provider. And I have to keep reminding myself that. So if I keep saying researcher, I apologize, because it's not just about research, it's also about providing programming or community development opportunities that these grant opportunities are out there for. So some of this information is a little different if you're going at it from a research perspective or if you're going at it from a programmatic perspective. So we'll kind of talk about that as we go. But so this is across the top is months. So yes, 9 months out isn't a ridiculous amount of time, and to set aside for proposal development, even up to a year, especially if it's a big collaborative project, which this group certainly has the opportunity to be a part of. And if you're going after a multi-million-dollar grant and you're part of that process of writing the proposal, there's a lot of conversations that have to happen behind the scenes before you can even submit. So this is just sort of an overview of kind of the things that I'm going to talk about. So I'm not going to go over this because it's just a list. And I will share this with Jordan afterwards for people who want to use this as something to reference back to, because time is of the essence, and I like to over provide information. So some of it I will just sort of share at the high altitude level, and then you can go back to it for the nitty gritty details as necessary. But one of the most important things that you have to do before you even start looking for funding is you have to identify what the problem is, or what is the current situation that you're trying to address. You know, is it economic development around fisheries? Is it community development, or is it educational programming? Is it, you know, lab bench science research that you're interested in, or is it sociology research? But you need to frame it in terms of what is current, and, you know, finding statistics and demographic data that you can use to back up why your program or your research is critical. Why are you doing this? You know, what is the purpose of it? What are the potential impacts? And I'm actually really excited that more and more federal funders are putting more emphasis on this piece. Not just, I'm going to get this data for scientific gain or sociological gain, or whatever the subject matter is, but how is it impacting the community? How is it impacting the individual? How is it impacting the global community? Why here, in terms of whatever organization you're representing, if it's a nonprofit organization, why are you the best ones to provide that training or to do that research? Same thing if you're coming from a university or a research station. What attributes, equipment, background of research or program delivery do you have to make this be more something that's successful? What qualifications do you have? What's your background or your interest, and what experiences do you have that make you the best person to do this? Or your team? Why did you pick those specific team members to be a part of it? Why now? That kind of goes back to the first one we already talked about. Why is it a critical issue that needs to be addressed now? And there's lots of examples out there in this arena, whether it's, you know, decrease in populations of fish, or climate change, or sea level rise. I mean, there's all kinds of different scientific pieces that make research in this field critical, but there's also, again, that sociological or community and educational piece that has direct ties. And sometimes you have to keep that in consideration. You might go into it thinking you're focused on this one specific thing, but then when you have conversations with other people, or you look at the grant opportunity, you think, boy, you know, if I looked at it a little differently, maybe this grant could fit. And we'll talk a little bit about that, a little more detail as we go. Most importantly, in terms of the funders, why should they care? Why should they fund your project? You need to be persuasive in how you write your proposal. You need to tell them in a clear, concise way, all of the things we already outlined, but most importantly, how is their money going to be used to do impactful work? And that's when it's really important. And Jen alluded to some of this in her presentation earlier, to know specific information about what the funder is looking for. And we'll dive a little deeper into a couple of examples of how to look for that. So this is, I had a whole slide on relationships, so I'm glad the question was asked, because it is an important one. And it is another thing that we're seeing a lot more of is partnerships and collaborative research, and not just within the same field. A lot of, you know, bringing in different stakeholders that have some sort of say or potential to provide support and or to benefit from the results of the research or the program. So that's when those conversations are really important, and trying to make those network connections. So it doesn't matter. I mean, there's lots of different strategies in how you can do that, whether you're going to a conference that's scientifically related, research related, and you take the time to peer network with people. You go to a town council meeting where they're talking about things that are relevant to your community, and you find out that there are other members of your community that have similar beliefs or have potential to support your project. It's really about reaching out and making connections, looking online at different universities to see the types of research that they're doing. And you're already part of a network, which is fantastic. Use that network to the biggest advantage that you can. Everybody that's a part of this conversation today has their own network. So you have to be brave, and you have to step out and share what you're doing and what you are interested in doing, and say, hey, anybody else, passionate about this or interested in being a part of coming up with a solution, or finding out more information about whatever the topic is that you're thinking about. So there's also industry partners that could be critical, not only just as part of the conversation, but on the funding side of it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So Jen talks about this a little bit. I just threw this slide up there. Grants.gov is where you're going to find a lot of federal grant opportunities. It's an open database. It has a lot of really good things where you can tag, you can save searches, you can set up like weekly email reminders of your search results, and it's pretty powerful. It might not be for some of the people on the call, this might not be the first place you go to, because this tends to be, like I said, federal grants. Really glad that Jen took the opportunity this afternoon to share with you about the foundation one, because that's usually a good starting point for people who don't have a lot of experience with grant writing. That's how I got my first experience, was going after a local foundation grant, because the requirements are significantly different. When you get up to the federal funding side of it, and this isn't always the case, but it tends to be talking about proposals that are, multiple pages long, lots of collaborators, lots of supporting documents that you have to include. Whereas the foundations tend to be a little bit more short and sweet and to the point. But again, that's not everybody, because there are some foundations out there, which is awesome, that are big givers. And everybody's requirements are different. So I'm going to talk about some strategies and some tips in general, but just remember that everybody has their own way of doing things. So it's really important to really dive into the funder specific information, so you make sure you're hitting what they want. So just leave that up here. It's pretty self-explanatory. Jen talked about this again already, and that's a nice thing about that foundation online. It lays it right out there. Bam, what do we fund? What don't we fund? Here, I'm going to show you a pretty chart and a table that shows you how much we've given. You don't have to dig very deeply to find out information on that particular site, though it makes it a really great site, again, as a starting point. But it is really important for certain funders. They are very mission driven, and to keep that in mind when you are putting your proposal in context. What they fund is just as important as what they don't fund. It sets up those parameters so you know what it is you're targeting for your ask. This tends to be one of the first things that most people look at, is to see if it even fits your funding goal. How much can you ask for? If it's a grant for only $5,000 and you need 50, is it worth your time going after that small one? Or should you go after something closer to your target? It might be a case where you get several $5,000 grants, and that's okay too. That's part of the planning, is to take a look at the big picture. What are your overall goals for your project, whether it's research or programming? And how am I going to get there? Create a grant calendar. This grant comes up every year, so I know I can plan that this chunk of my time. I can do work to go after a grant for this amount of money, and strategize in terms of how to put that together in the hopes that you'll reach that funding goal. So federal agencies in general, it's obviously federal budget based, so it can fluctuate depending upon who's in power and what they decide are the most important things to sort of focus on. So there can be some fluctuations. Like I said, they tend to be larger in denomination, not always. Again, that depends on what they've decided is to sort of be their priorities for that given period. Depending upon what subject area you are looking at, this whole system of fisheries, what lens you're looking through, you'll notice that the funding dollar amounts are not equivalent. And it's actually one of the really interesting things you see when you dive into these federal funders and what they fund. There's some of them are very heavy on supporting scientific research. Others are very strong supporters of educational programming, community development. Then you have a whole slew of humanities as well. So that's why it's important to sort of look at it across lenses, like I've said. Nice thing about federal agencies, they have program officers, and program officers are your lifesaver. This is one of the most important pieces of information to get when you find a grant that you're interested in, because they are going to basically tell you before you even go through the process of writing a whole proposal, whether or not it's worth doing it. You can have a conversation with them ahead of time and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking of. Here are my goals and my objectives, and what the impact is of my research or my program. Does this fit what you are funding? And it might not be. And the best part of that is they can help direct you to another funder, or even somebody else within that funding agency that might be more interested in funding your work. There's nothing worse than going through months of writing to then have it come back rejected, saying this is not what we are funding. Set yourself up for success at the beginning by having that quick conversation with a program officer before you really dive deep. State agencies, and again, I had a lot of fun digging in, trying to find out what is out there in Alaska. And for those of you who are in Maine, I have all these slides for Maine too. There's lots of opportunities out there at the state level. And this would be true across the US, right? The Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife in whatever state you're from, or the Department of Education. There's lots of different statewide agencies that are available. They tend to be smaller just because you're talking about a smaller budget, right? Now you've gone from a federal budget, which is trillions, down to a state level budget. So the dollar amounts tend to be a little bit smaller, but it's the best strategy here is just to go to those different sites, their actual .gov sites, and to see what grant opportunities are out there and the different details. Industry, that's why industry partners are really important. Not only do they add important voice in the conversation of research and program delivery, but they can support you financially because they have a vested interest in the results of your work. Sometimes, just getting information that can help them make decisions about their buying and selling, or even just what species of organism they're harvesting, for example. So there's lots of potential for having industry partners, but they usually do want something in return, right? They want, and we're not talking like money or anything like that. It's that data, or even it's good for them and their public appearance to provide support for community projects, programming and or research. Private foundations, which I won't go over in a lot of details because that was a big part of what Jen talked about. But more than anything else, foundational grant writing, or grant funders, I should say, they want to know more about you than anything else. You really have to make yourself known. It's relationships are key with foundation grants. They aren't always going to be experts in the field that you are an expert in. They may be more like general public, because we're talking about board members usually when you're talking about foundations, and board members tend to be made up of members of the community at large. So you're definitely going to be writing to a different audience when you're writing to a foundation, because you don't want to use a lot of jargon and hardcore content or scientific words, because you want them to understand what they're reading. Like I mentioned already, this is usually a good first step because it tends to be a smaller pocket of money. And a lot of times their applications are much simpler. It's, a couple, few pages of writing, some questions fill in, and a budget and things like that. It's not a huge amount of details about methods and approach and things like that, which you would do for a lot of research projects in general. Remember, everybody's processes are a little different. So once you know roughly where you're looking, state, federal, foundational, you really need to look at the details about what they're asking for. And we've been talking about that, and you'll hear it over and over again, because it's one of the most important things. Somebody brought up the word RFP earlier. RFP, FOA, they're all just the written description of what the funder is looking for. All those nitty-gritty details that you need to cover when you're applying to them for funding. So and you saw a little bit of this on that foundation online site, but if you, like Jen mentioned, if you click the hyperlink at the top to go to the actual foundation site, you'd get more details to find out this information. And these are just key pieces that I target when I look at an RFP and help people identify as a good funding opportunity. What are the goals and priorities for that funder? Are you eligible? Some of them are specifically like we'll say a 2 to 4 year public university, or a nonprofit organization, or state government. Now, don't knock off state government as a potential, because you could then take that grant opportunity to somebody in the state and say, hey, look, I'd like to partner with you. Here's an opportunity where we could work together. You could be the lead on submitting this grant, but we could be a part of a collaborative research or project team and go after this funding opportunity. Deadlines, deadlines is actually the first thing I always look at. Is it reasonable? If it's 2 months out, that's going to be a stretch. Also look back and see if this is an opportunity that comes up annually. And if it is, and that the deadline for 2021, let's say, is 2 months away, but it says in there what the due date is for 2022, start your grant planning calendar and say, hey, a year from now, I'm going to go for this grant because I know it's going to happen. I can start planning now. I can start coming up with my concept, my idea, my research question, and I can start bringing different players to the table and have conversations about how we would write a proposal. Cost sharing and matching is an important thing. And I know some of you participated in a USDA conversation already about grants, and USDA does have cost sharing obligation for most of their grants. Not all funders have match, and that can definitely be a make or break for some people, depending upon where they're coming from. If you can't do a 50% match or a 1 to, or more, then don't do it. I mean, go for something that you can be successful in. How do you apply? Thank goodness. It's now online. Remember when I first started writing grants and I would have to send in paper copies, 3 paper copies of a grant application through the mail. It's so much easier now with online processes that, and you can sort of do them as you go, save them, do bits and pieces, save your work as you go, and before you hit your final submit. How are they going to look at your proposal? Is it going to be a team of scientists or a team of sociologists sitting down at a table, all dissecting the nitty gritty details of your proposal? Or is it a boardroom with 5 community members talking about your proposal? A lot of big funders for sure will have very specified procedures on how they will rank your proposal, and that's all listed out in that RFP, which we'll take a quick look at. I'm not going to go too deep into an RFP because that takes some time to digest for sure. And look at some example proposals. A lot of them, especially the federal funders, will not only say what they have funded in the past, but they'll actually have synopses of successful or abstracts from successful proposals in the past. And it can give you a good sort of framing for what they actually support. And for you to also keep in mind when you're defining your research or your project, that yours is unique, right? Funders don't want to necessarily fund the same thing over and over again. So you have to be innovative. You have to try something new, something different. And it doesn't mean it can't be similar to what somebody else has done, but then build off of that, right? Do something to expand the work or look at it from a different angle. All right. So if, for example, this had come up, if anybody in Alaska, this is one up in your neck of the woods. This is a foundation site that I happened to find, and there's nothing wrong, and Jen also said this too, there's nothing wrong with sometimes going to Google first. For those of you in Maine, there are community foundations. So Maine Community Foundation, right, that pulls in all of the foundations for the state. There are lots of examples of that across the country. Or you can just Google, foundations in New York that fund fishing, or community development or economic development. When you go into their site, it tells you everything you need to know. And I told you one of the most important things is to make sure you know what their mission is. So sometimes you have to dig, but it's all there. So this is going to give you a pretty good outline of what this foundation is looking for when they give what kind of budget they're dealing with, what kind of overall budget. Remember, this isn't how much you can ask for. This is the total. In this case, this is the total of how much they're going to give. So they might say in here even that they're going to give out 5 grants, or they're only going to give out 1 grant. So if they're only going to give out one grant, you have got to be stellar in your proposal. There we go. Contact us. This is one of the most important things. Have that conversation with them early. Let me move this one out of the way. Oh, see my email. That's not good. All right. All right. So I'm going to just briefly jump into looking at an RFP. And some of you on the call are probably familiar with this. Some of you may not be, but this is a particular RFP from NSF, so National Science Foundation. And the one I picked was one called Coastlines and People. So within the National Science Foundation, there's all these different directorates. Then these are the different sort of levels of or different research arms of NSF. So right at the top, they almost always let you know due dates. And in this case, it tells you that you have to write a letter of intent. You don't always have to. Sometimes grants are just fill in the application and send it in. Sometimes they want to get an idea of what is going to be coming through, and even to do sort of a preliminary cutoff and say yes or no before you even do the whole application. So this one has a letter of intent when the proposal is due, and yay, look at this, you know, it's due October 28th annually. So that's one to write down on your grant calendar and say, you know, is it feasible? And it very well could be, because we're only just now into almost April, to get together to write a proposal for this October, or we could really give ourselves a good chunk of time and plan for October 28th, 2022. They'll tell you the overall goals of the program, the synopsis. Here are the people, or the person in this case, you want to talk to, the program officer, cognizant program officer. They have this kind of budget, and they are going to give 8 to 10 awards. And it tells you how long the grant period is for, whether it's to do programming over 3 to 5 years or to do research during that time. Eligibility, institutions of higher education. So if you're from a university, in this case, they also include community colleges, which is fantastic. Community colleges are one of those great opportunities for partnership, especially if you're going to look at funding related to workforce development, because a lot of the educational programming in community colleges very much so with a workforce development focus. So they can make really good partners on those types of grants. And nonprofits, museums, research labs can apply for this funding as well. In this case, PI means primary investigator. So this is the person who's going to sort of report back out about everything and be the sort of one in charge of the process. Anybody says there's no restrictions on who could be the program, the primary investigator, sorry. And then I'm not going to go any deeper than that, because look, it keeps going and going and going. This is one where you need to be graceful to yourself and give yourself time. You need to read this. And we always recommend to people read it. If you're like me, I'm still pretty old school and I like to have paper in front of me. I read it and I highlight it and I make notes. Don't lose sight of this document. This is the how-to. If you follow this, you're more likely to be successful in your proposal because they're telling you in a lot of detail exactly what they want in your proposal. So keep referring back to this. And we tell people, read it, reread it, write your proposal, read the RFP again, and then read your proposal again. And make sure you're hitting everything that they're asking for. Because if you're not, they're not going to accept your proposal. They're going to reject it. So this is and if you saw the USDA ones are just the same. There's a lot of information there. And it does tell you, I kind of stopped on this point for a reason, because it does tell you how they're going to review your application, what that criteria is. And it also tells you things about what do you have to report back to the funder eventually. All right, move that back out of the way. So we kind of filled this in already, because we're just kind of talking. So once you have found, and I've talked about this, about contacting the program officer, but you don't want to just cold call or cold email a program officer. It's nice to frame that conversation with them. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to write a concept paper or a white paper, or even just an outline of what it is that you're hoping to achieve, to sort of outline the who, what, where, when, why, and what it, and the impacts, that type of thing. So that, send them an email and say, I'd like to have a conversation with you about what we're thinking of, and I want to make sure it's a good fit. Here's my a paper, a concept paper of my ideas, so you know where I'm coming from. And then you can have a deeper conversation with them when you talk to them. You're not going to take the time to go through the step-by-step outline of what you're thinking. Instead, you're going to say, you've already had an opportunity to read what I'm thinking about. I appreciate some feedback to know if this is a good fit, or, or is there a different way I should frame it so that it's more in alignment with what you're looking for. All right, so that's sort of in a very quick overarching nutshell, how to look for funding, and at least a couple of examples of looking at the details. And I apologize, I didn't dive in deep enough on that foundation site, but on that foundation site, one of the tabs was the grant application. So if you click on it, it pulls up a separate screen that talks about how you have to apply. All right, so we'll jump. Let me breathe for a second, because I've been talking at you for so long. Any general questions? And if I didn't hit the partnership thing, or if anybody else, I'll tell you, I don't know everything. I learn all the time from other people, and I think that's important. So if you have tips or strategies for helping to make those network connections or collaborative relationship connections, please share. And like I said, you all have a leg up already because you're part of this network right now. And that's fantastic. So finding the opportunity amongst yourselves to have those conversations outside of having us from the outside come in is for you guys to, make those smaller group meetings to have those conversations within your own network. No? Okay. All right, well, I'll jump right into just some brief writing strategies. And again, this isn't, there are lots of things out there. Jen showed you the resource page that she has. Most federal funders have things on their site to help you in the writing process. So take the opportunity to look at those funders' sites. So I just pulled up that NSF RFP. But if you go to the NSF site, there within their pages, you can find all sorts of information to help you through the process. So stay organized. I talked about this already. Give yourself time and plan. Use good writing skills, good communication skills, persuasive communication skills. And remember that you're not the only one who's applying. So you need to stand out. You need to, the person that's, or people that are reading your proposal, you need to razzle dazzle. And you need to make sure, again, that it's directed or framed in a way that they can understand it. Some of these large proposals, these large federal proposals, we're talking 50 pages of information that people are having to go through. So strategies to sort of make your things work out, like using visuals and white space. I'll show you the example of here. This is just an example of a template. I'm not going to go through this. This is an NSF one, but it's just something they're out there. There's all different sorts of examples of them. I have ones that I've made for people for certain types of proposals. And like I said, there's a lot out online if you look for it. Templates or charts or timelines, checklists, whatever it takes. And so you look at that RFP, look at all, or the grant proposal information, look at all the requirements and, set it up and do it a little at a time. Don't sit down and think you're going to be able to get through it in an evening. I think I talked about a lot of this stuff already at the top, but when a funder is very specific about what their requirements are, make that obvious in your document. So highlight it, use it as a heading or a subheading, bold, italics, things that are going to draw their attention to those words and to know that you've hit those specific things for sure in your proposal. Yeah, I've talked about the second to last one here already a little bit, but what is the impact of your work beyond just getting information or just providing the program? Is it change in attitude about aquaculture within the community? Is it like I mentioned before, workforce development skills? Are you helping to build the next generation of fisheries by doing programs for K-12 students? Are you doing sea level rise data collection to help address policymakers' decisions and strategies to deal with global temperature change, whatever the case may be? How showing that impact is important. This one is sometimes hard for people, but it really can save you sometimes, is to actually reach out for help and be open to feedback. Have somebody read it. Could be somebody within your own field or your own organization. Have them read it. Do they understand it? And then have somebody completely outside of your field take a look at it. And that could be someone like me. I've general knowledge about this stuff as a science educator, but I'm certainly not an expert. But I can look at it from a different perspective and say, boy, this is great, but maybe you could clarify a little bit here, or what were you trying to get at when you were mentioning this? So I would recommend, for those of you who are not within a university environment, to find those people that you can reach out to. And again, you have people here on this call that would probably love to be a part of that and say, hey, I'm putting something together. Can you help me brainstorm ideas? And I'd really appreciate it if you could just read through my proposal. There are a lot of, on the whole, people are very gracious, and they know for the greater good that their time, investing their little bit of time to read through your proposal is a win-win situation. So you're not expected to be able to read this, but this is just to sort of talk about, this one has the specific goals and outcomes with with underline as a subheading and headers here, just so that, again, you can draw the reader's attention to those things. This is a work plan. So what are you going to do during the years and months of your project? And instead of writing it out as a paragraph, multiple paragraphs, if you can put it in as a chart or as a Gantt table or a Gantt chart, something like that, then it's a little bit easier to read. It says the same thing, but it's not just lots of words. And then the power of white space. Be concise in your writing, right? You don't have to use long, drawn out sentences and be, like I said, concise and be nice to the reader, right? This is a lot of eye strain here to have really small font and just compact amount of words. All right, what do I have? My goodness, there's so much to do. I have to stop, don't I? I'm going to buzz through these really quickly, but again, I will share this with you if you're interested. There are just sort of general overall pieces of most proposals, and I outlined some things to keep in mind in each of those sections. But I wanted to go to the end really quickly because I wanted to make sure I gave time for a question, and I know there are some things that Jordan wants to talk with you about too. So things to remember. Here we go. Read that RFP or RFA or FOA or whatever they call it, you know, what the funder is asking for, right? Everybody has their own name. Read it, the whole thing before you start to write. Reach out for help, use outlines, templates, checklists. Take it slowly. Have someone else read it when you're done. One of the biggest reasons proposals are rejected is because they aren't in alignment with what the funder wanted. And that's why that preliminary conversation with a program officer or a member of the board of directors at a foundation is critical. Have that conversation and say, am I on the right track? One of the other unfortunate reasons why proposals get rejected is because you didn't hit all the things they wanted. That's why having those checklists are really important. Make sure you have all the pieces in place. Again, you want to be innovative. They want new ideas. Oops, sorry. And believe it or not, number of pages. If you are over the number of pages, they won't even read it. So keep those details in mind. Doesn't matter how amazing your idea is. That's one of the first things they do to sort of reduce the number of proposals down, is just to look at, are you following the guidelines? Are all the attachments here? And are you at the right number of pages? Reporting is important. Some federal agencies are very specific on how you have to report. For a foundation grant, you just want to show your appreciation for what they gave you. Like, for example, I do a little video of, a lot of the work that I did was programming for students. So a little video with students giving, their own thank yous, or showing students doing the work that was funded because that foundation gave you that money. So there's, again, that varies depending upon who you're asking for support from. But it's not just about the paycheck, right? Or not the paycheck. It's not just about the money that comes in. It's about the work. It's about showing the impact of the work and disseminating that, right? Sharing it. And not just within, like if you're from, if the scientific community, not just within a scientific journal, but within your community, on your campus, in your state, and definitely community members at large. All right, I'll stop. Get excited about this stuff, and there's too much to cover, but I wanted to give you as much as I could.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle. Both you and Jen have provided a lot of really great information. I'd love to take this time to open it up to questions. So feel free to unmute yourselves, or if you want to drop your questions in the chat, you can do that. But we're going to leave this time for you guys to ask some questions. I'll be shocked if nobody has questions. I'm guessing for most of you that are on this call, you plan to apply for grant funding or have applied in the past and just wanted to get a little bit more information. I'm curious, maybe you guys could put in the chat, like, who all is planning to apply for funding soon? And then also, again, if you just have any other general questions. Wow, you two must have covered everything. Did a really great
Right.
job. Okay, cool. Well, okay, here we go. So Natalie, they're continuously applying for grants, possibly a USDA grant in the next month. It's very time intensive.
Mhm.
And Jordan Ben has his hand raised.
All right, Ben, if you want to take it
Go
away.
for it, ask.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Just want to thank you guys. It's for putting this together. As a commercial fisherman, the last 23 years, I think I brought this up at the last kind of Zoom meeting we did. There's been a divide between producers and fishermen, and some of the other organizations, some of the CSFs in our state that seem to get grants again and again and again and again. And I think it's just a huge thing for someone like myself to be able to understand the process a little bit more and to kind of be able to come up with a game plan.
Mhm.
You know, I enjoy educating the public about local fisheries, scientifically managed fisheries, et cetera, and fishing itself. But this is something that I couldn't put together without guidance like you guys are giving. So I just want to thank you guys for putting this together. I won't be able to write the grant myself, but kind of giving me some tools to possibly get something going. So I just want to say that and say thank you.
That's great. And you have the opportunity to provide some pretty cool sort of hands-on experience, spiritual learning. And that's something that can sometimes be a limitation for some of the university researchers. They need to find those people to connect with, to bring their research to the community, especially K-12 world. So that would be a really great partnership opportunity.
Maybe Danielle, to kind of play off that, and maybe Jen too. It sounds like there's a large amount of importance placed on building relationships. If people within our network who are doing more of the fishing and implementing programs on their local level, what's the best way to connect with the university to build those partnerships? Is it talking with specific researchers, kind of looking and seeing like what research aligns with what they're doing? Is it a specific department? I don't know if you guys could speak to that at all.
I think it depends on where you are at. I mean, if you're somebody who's already has a relationship with somebody, then definitely reach out to them directly. If you're looking in terms of a brand new partnership or relationship to create, I would definitely say, look at the website and find out who's seems to be a good partner and reach out. Or you could also reach out, if you're from Maine, reach out to the Office of Research, because we know who's doing what on campus and can help create those partnerships. And I'm pretty sure that's the same across the United States in the research office. They're the ones who can sort of direct traffic. If you are a little leery of contacting a researcher right off the bat.
Awesome, thank you. It looks like Ben, it looks like Ryan has his hand up. So Ryan, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I just actually wanted to make a comment and thank you guys for putting this together. Yeah, as like Ben said, I'm a fisherman for many years, and it's always been this divide between the folks that know how to put these things together and those that don't. I joined Sitka Salmon Shares a few years ago, and they've been great at connecting us with, you know, other people. Like, you know, I sit on the board there, and we have these business types, and then the fishermen, which is really cool, and it's great. It's great to interact with those folks, and yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys, and keep up all the good work.
Great, thanks. I'll also say, you don't have to keep it to your own state. Remember that. I mean, even if you all decided to sort of create a list of who your collaborators are and you're willing to share that information, do it. I mean, a lot of good research comes from, you know, broadening that scope and having partners across the country or across the world even. You don't have to necessarily just reach out to your local university.
Great. It looks like Stephanie also has a question. Stephanie, if you want to go ahead.
Stephanie, you're muted. If you're saying anything, you're muted right now. Actually, I don't know if you'll hear me, but Stephanie, you're muted if you're saying anything right now.
All right. Stephanie, feel free to chime in if you would like. But if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to chime in. All right. Well, oh, sorry. Did I interrupt?
So, yeah, sorry. I don't know if you can hear
There you
me.
go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so actually, you guys are kind of talking about a bit about reaching out to universities. I'm currently a senior at Colorado State University, and I'm just like wondering, like, is there any other like more advice of like how I could reach out to like more community or campus members? I like to think that I have like a pretty good relationship with some of my professors who are doing a lot of research. And I'm thinking about reaching out to them about like what they're doing and how I could potentially do like my own research and stuff like that, because I'm thinking about doing like a master's and whatnot. So I'm wondering, like, is there any more like advice that you would have for me? Things that I should like think about?
Well, I definitely reach out to the professors you already have relationships with. That'll be the easier conversation because they already know you, and they may be able to open those doors for you to other people within the department or across the campus that are available. But again, the Office of Research, it's really their job, whether it's in Orono or anywhere else on a university campus. It is to help drive research. So making those connections is a big part of our responsibility. Deans, having a conversation with a dean can sometimes be helpful, but sometimes it's harder to get in on that conversation as a student or even as an outside community member. So to have a conduit like somebody like a professor, you know, or somebody in the research department that can make that introduction is always good practice. To say, hey, we have somebody that's really interested in this, you know, I want to introduce you to them. Here's their contact information. You know, can you open that conversation when it's convenient for you? That makes sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Grad school office too can be a good resource if, as a student, if you're thinking of going on to grad school, they have lots of connections and resources as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And that just had me thinking about all the people that I could reach out to and make those like connections with and start networking to see like what possibilities there are. So thank you for that.
You. That's an important skill to learn, and it's not always easy. But the sooner you can start building that network, the better off you'll be.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for all of the information that you guys presented today. It was really awesome and like super impactful and made me learn so much.
Awesome. Great. I'm glad you came.
All right, great. Thank you all so much for hopping on the call today. I'm going to start closing out the session. If you guys have any other follow-up questions outside of the session, please feel free to email me. I'll be sending out a link to the recording of the session today, as well as some of the resources that Jen and Danielle shared with us. In the same vein of funding, I'm going to drop a link here in the chat. USDA, we're working with them pretty closely to help inform future funding and research / program opportunities, and would love to get your feedback in order to do that and share that information with the USDA. We really want to get a strong voice and push behind community supported fisheries and small scale fisheries. So I ask you guys to take a look at that and fill that out if you get the chance. We also have a local catch network survey that will be coming out this Monday, this coming Monday. It should take about 10 minutes of your time, and it'll help us to better understand what sessions we want to be providing for you all in the future. But other than that, we really want to just thank Jen and Danielle for joining us and sharing their expertise with us today. We're hopeful that this session equipped you all with the tools to identify, interpret, and apply for grant funding moving forward. And yes, if there are any other questions that come up in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to us. But other than that, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen and Danielle.